Welcome to the AlphaMind Podcast with me, Stephen Goldstein, and my co-host Mark Randall, where we explore, discuss, and expand upon all aspects of the mindset, behavioural, and psychological aspects of trading and investing. Highly effective traders and investors invest time and energy to change and overcome their resistance to change and uncertainty. This means being willing to go to uncomfortable places and do things that make them feel uncomfortable despite internal resistance, born of narratives which they have come to accept unconsciously as truths, irrespective of whether they are or not. Their willingness to stretch themselves in pursuit of their purpose and to put themselves through the mill and fight back against their anxiety pays off as they develop a growth mindset which propels them forward in life and helps them engage more productively and effectively with markets and the huge challenges they face in markets. Less effective people tend to give in and continue to do the easy behaviours, holding on to unproductive and fixed mindsets that hold them back, preferring instead to make excuses and blame others and circumstances. In doing so, they unconsciously accept victim status and will never truly become the victim. Our guest today is Ben Aldridge, author of the book How to Be Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable and other books on dealing with uncertainty and discomfort. For the book, Ben put himself through a series of challenges aimed at helping him deal with and overcome discomfort and internal resistance to uncertainty and challenge. This is a great interview with a really interesting and informed guest, where we discuss a topic which is integral in every sense to developing high performance in trading, investing, and market-related activities. Here is a clip from this week's episode.
Well, your mindset is incredibly important. How you think determines your reality. So I think that's something that I found the hard way, I guess, because essentially what took me into that dark mental space, well, several things, but I think ultimately the way that I spoke to myself in my head over time compounded. So I had a very negative internal dialogue, and I think that ultimately is very destructive. So the way you speak to yourself, the language you use, how you think about the external world, how you manage all of that is so powerful. And I didn't think that it could actually manifest itself in a physical way within my body, but it did in the end. So I think it just shows how the way that we speak to ourselves and the way that we think is just so important.
Before we start, we would like to thank our podcast partners TradeStation Global and the Society of Technical Analysts. TradeStation Global is a multi-asset trading platform with access to international markets. Trade stocks, forex futures and micro e-mini futures from one account. Leverage professional grade tools like Radar Screen, The Matrix and Easy Language, an intuitive coding language for traders. And with TradeStation Global, there are no hidden price spreads, just transparent, low commissions. To find out more and open an account, visit tradestationinternational.com/AlphaMind or see the link in the episode description. TradeStation International Limited is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK and acts as an introducing broker to Interactive Brokers UK Limited. The firm does not provide investment advice or trading recommendations. Investment and trading involves risk, including possible loss of principal. At present, the TradeStation Global product is not available to EU residents. The Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, are another long-established organisation with a great reputation. They are a member-led and not-for-profit body who have been providing world-beating education to the trading and investment community for over 5 decades and serve the needs of their members by providing outstanding online talks and webinars, regular newsletters, education, diplomas and continued professional development programs. Their home study course has been created by many of the world's leading minds in technical analysis and provides learning of a depth and breadth that is unparalleled in the trading and investing world. Listeners to the AlphaMind podcast can obtain a 10% discount on the cost of the STA home study course. Visit alpha-mind.net and go to the sponsor section of our page to find out how to obtain this. Now on with this week's podcast.
The title of this podcast is Coping with Adversity, Uncertainty and Discomfort. And as you know, myself and Steve have great discussions about the need to be able to deal with, you know, the tragedies and trauma of being a trader, and certainly discomfort is a word that everyone that trades the market will be very aware of. And we're delighted to have Ben Aldridge on the show this week. Ben is author of How to Be Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable. Himself on his own panic attack journey, led to him writing a book about how to deal with that. And certainly I myself had the experience in the late 80s of suffering panic attacks, and you do think you're about to die when you have them. And I could certainly understand the need to then try to work a program of how to deal with this. So Ben, welcome to the show. Tell us a bit more about that journey and that beginning and how you've got into this space that you're in at the moment.
Well, hi guys. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here. So I got into all of this off the back of anxiety, like you said. I started having really bad panic attacks out of the blue. And this kind of sent me on a bit of a journey to firstly understand what was happening to my mind, and secondly, to try and to do something about it. It's quite a terrifying experience when you first have a panic attack. And the way that I dealt with it, to cut a very long story short, I started reading extensively on philosophy and psychology and all these different ideas, essentially like bibliotherapy. So I immersed myself in as much literature as I could. And ultimately, this is what helped me manage that and to understand my mind. And this lifted me out of that dark place. And then I started writing about my journey and some of the things that helped me when I was in that space. And now I write books about lots of things, and mainly focusing on philosophy and resilience and what we can do to develop mental resilience and how we can manage that adversity that we all inevitably have to face, because life is great at throwing curveballs at us. So I guess that's the origin story in a way.
So I mean, just from your experience of it, perhaps I could join into this. Just describe what a panic attack feels like. When everything just becomes too much, because some people may have actually experienced a panic attack and not realize it's a panic attack.
So
you can share some of that.
So it can manifest in many ways. For me, I think the best explanation is to imagine you're about to do something terrifying. So maybe you're about to jump out of a plane, and that would be very physical. You'd feel that in your body. So you'd likely have shaky legs, and you'd probably feel sick. Your heart would be racing. You would be sweaty and nauseous, and you feel pretty awful. You'd probably feel like you're about to die, to be honest. But it's natural in that situation because you're doing something scary. So you're about to jump out of a plane. You can understand why you've got all this adrenaline running through your body. And for me, the panic attacks happened without a cause. They just came out of nowhere. So you're just kind of minding your own business, and then suddenly you feel as if you're in grave danger, and there's this impending sense of doom. And I guess it feels like you're having a heart attack, and it's very intense, very physical. And they come in waves, and they can last for quite a while. And it's very disarming experience. It's intense. That's probably the best way of describing it. Very intense. So I think learning how to manage them and basically knowing what they are is part of the battle. When I first started having them, I didn't know what they were. So this really threw me. I genuinely just thought I was dying. I didn't know what was going on.
For me, it was almost like somebody was sitting on my chest, and I couldn't breathe properly, particularly when I was on underground trains. And it seemed to be that I always had a fear as a child of going on the underground, and that led later in life to just being slightly uneasy about that situation. And I actually obviously was carrying a sort of a mental load of issues from work or wherever. And that was enough with this environment I didn't like to get triggering me into literally having to get off, go up to the ground level to just get fresh air, because I did feel I was going to be passing out. It's a bit like having a migraine, where you just get this blank sort of fuzziness of vision. And my method around it was to pay more attention to developing self skills like sort of mindfulness, mind fitness, that sort of stuff, and that led me into managing what were very, very difficult events. And I had them at trading desks as well. I saw other people in trading rooms actually become just quite frigid, almost scared stiff, as it were, literally scared stiff through having these attacks. So they are part of everyday life, unfortunately. But it's trying to understand the trigger and then understanding, well, if one is coming on, just what you can do to, alleviate, actually it becoming worse, because, panic attacks can turn into something, a bit more nasty, if you don't, pay attention to, having to manage them. And I suppose for you, did that level of nastiness ever occur where you actually felt you needed to go and see somebody about it?
Yeah, so this, for me, it didn't go away. It was unrelenting. And as I said, I didn't really understand what was happening. So I went to the doctor, who recommended a series of things that I could do, but I'm quite stubborn. So for me, I decided that before I committed to anything, I wanted to understand the situation better. So that's when I turned to books, and it was through this extensive reading that I discovered loads of ideas that ultimately led me to be able to manage that, and to ultimately build more resilience in my life. I felt that that was something that I lacked. So there are many, many philosophies and things that I connected with, but Stoicism in particular is something that helped me to manage everything. And this is an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. And the main purpose of Stoicism is to help us build better lives and to learn how to navigate chaos, which is pretty much what I was dealing with at the time. So I started applying some of these ideas from the philosophy, and it had such a profound impact on my life. And it was a complete game changer for me. So it's been quite a journey. In particular, the idea of challenging yourself, that's something that really resonated with me, and that's what I started doing first, which was kind of counterintuitive when you're almost afraid of everything. And I created a series of challenges that were based on things that I would be scared of. And at first it was like literally walking to the park bench. And then over time, these challenges became bolder and more exciting. But at first, it's very small steps. And over time, my confidence came back, and I learned how to manage fear, and I learned how to manage that anxiety, and ended up doing more interesting things like running marathons and ice swimming and climbing mountains and loads of different things, and stepping outside of my academic comfort zone as well. So learning Japanese and learning how to solve the Rubik's Cube and pick locks. And basically these challenges became my way of learning how my mind worked under pressure, and how I managed how I can manage that anxiety. So that's really the journey, and that's what turned everything around for me.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Steve. I'm just cutting in here after Mark's introduction. First of all, welcome to the show, and also it's a real pleasure to have you on, because we normally interview traders, but we thought, how can we have a couple of subjects and themes which are really relevant to the experiences traders go through, but aren't particularly or necessarily directly about trading. And being uncomfortable just jumped out, it leapt off the page. Not so much about uncertainty. We've done episodes on uncertainty, on things like behavioral biases, so how we are often kind of unconditionally programmed to deal with uncertainty. But one of the things that I talk about a lot with people, and I know Mark does as well, is trying to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's what trading does to you. It throws you every single day, almost minute by minute, into these situations where you're facing extreme discomfort. And within that, you have to be able to make, you have to stay calm, you have to stick to process, you have to make sure that you stay on the path that you set yourself. And when I've just finished reading your book, or actually listening to the book, which I absolutely loved, by the way, How to Be Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable. When I started listening to it, there was a little bit of me that thought, well, these situations aren't quite parallels for trading. The kind of the constant noise, the constant situations coming at you that are unexpected, whereas you set them up. But then as I went through the book and listened to it, actually the way you did it was brilliant, because you reflected on each one of them. And collectively, there was something that in each of them, some of the difficulties that you face with trading. And actually, even though they were tasks you set yourself, that they really, like you said, pushed you out of your comfort zone in different ways.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. Yes, I think the whole journey's been very interesting, and there are lots of parallels I think that can be used here. And really, the purpose of all of these challenges that I've been doing is to help me prepare for life. So in a way, I think we all have challenges, and there are two types of challenges. There are either the ones that we choose to do, or the ones that are thrust onto us from the universe. Basically, we have to manage the things that get thrown at us. So we do the challenges that we choose as a way to prepare for the challenges that we don't choose. So I think this can be very helpful, because when you're in a controlled environment, a relatively controlled environment, you can see how you work under pressure. So that then when you have pressure naturally from whatever situation you find yourself in, you've got a set of tools and ideas that you can use because you've used them and you've tested them out. And that's really what I found so useful about this whole process of seeking out challenges and deliberately looking at different ways that I could push myself, because I think that's ultimately what helped me to get in control of my mind again. And it allowed me to manage things in life that would naturally be difficult to deal with. But because I've got tools and tricks and different things that I know work in under pressure, I found that that's been immensely useful. So I think, yeah, that's something that all of us can benefit from.
Yeah, and one of the observations we've made in our work over the years, we've been in those seats as traders and brokers, sort of being pushed out by highly uncertain situations almost on a daily basis. But in the last decade, we've both worked as coaches with individuals in these industries. And one of the things we've noticed is how many of the most successful people are people that have had some sort of trauma early in their life, something that told them the world is not going to bend to my will, something that is, that completely thrown them out, a curveball from life. And, one of the problems that we meet is a lot of people that go through and have a really smooth, sort of gilded path, school, sports team, university, get a good job, land themselves in a trading role in an investment bank, or a hedge fund or a prop trading firm. And then they're suddenly, they learn you need to do it this way, and this way, kind of almost an academic learning. And then they suddenly find situations thrust upon them in a really big way that don't follow the plan. And those people who have had those life traumas have the internal resources to deal with it. And what I felt was, as you were going through the book, you were trying to replicate examples of those kind of miniature traumas, or like you said, you had the panic attack.
Yeah, so I think that's really the purpose of this, is to create those environments, the controlled environment where you're testing yourself, and that can map onto almost everything. And I think it's very easy to stay within your comfort zone, but there's an incredible benefit to actually pushing outside of it. We grow as human beings by doing this. We also learn so much about ourselves. And I think that's something that has a lot of value. Looking for the lesson when we're doing something that we find uncomfortable can be incredible. And that's something that I found, like, reflecting on everything that I did. So I put myself in loads of different bizarre situations as a way to test everything out, test out the philosophy I've been reading about, but also to learn lessons and to be able to kind of reflectively look at what I've been doing. So I think that's something that people can have fun with. And that's why I would always try and encourage people to do. A lot of my writing has challenges in it. And I think that's really what's important to me, is that combination of practical philosophy and kind of getting out there and testing it out in the real world. So, you can read about a concept, you can read about something, but it doesn't really have the same impact unless you actually test it out. So I think that's why having some sort of challenge and different things that you can do is extremely useful.
Absolutely. I'm going to hand over to Mark in a minute, because we do a little bit of tandem stuff here and relay stuff. Just before I do, right, and I'll mute myself to the benefit of the audience. I just want to bring up something you said at the very beginning, because that really leapt off the page to me. Okay, you talked about when you have this panic attack, that you have this impending sense of doom. And I asked a question last week to our Twitter followers, and we had some great responses. I put a poll out there which asks people when they're running trading positions, when you wake up in the morning, do you feel, if you're running a position overnight, do you tend to feel that position's going to be better than you hope for? Or do you feel it's going to have gone worse than you hoped for? And the number of people who replied worse than we hoped for outranked better than they hoped for by a factor of 4 to 1. And I know that's not official science, but I think that's what a lot of people do in this industry. There's almost like this impending sense of doom all the time.
That's very interesting. Well, your mindset is incredibly important. It's how you think determines your reality. So I think that's something that I found the hard way, I guess, because essentially what took me into that dark mental space, well, several things, but I think ultimately the way that I spoke to myself in my head over time compounded. So I had a very negative internal dialogue, and I think that ultimately is very destructive. So the way you speak to yourself, the language you use, how you think about the external world, how you manage all of that is so powerful. And I didn't think that it could actually manifest itself in a physical way within my body, but it did in the end. So I think it just shows how the way that we speak to ourselves and the way that we think is just so important. And I guess this is very relevant to what you guys do and a lot of your audience, because they're going to obviously be under a lot of pressure. And I think it's how do you manage that, and how do you stay positive when the market's going crazy, and what can you do, what fundamentals can you put in place to help you manage all of that?
Yes, our mind is the source of our suffering, which I think you actually had a quote within your book, couldn't it? It very much is. And particularly since we have this slight negativity bias where, if we have an experience, like if we go shopping, whatever, and we have 9 positive experience and 1 negative experience, and the 9 positive ones where we bought everything that fantastic that we were going to buy, but the one little argument we had with the sales assistant for something not in stock suddenly became the thing that we remember for days and days and days, and we forgot about all these positives. And I think in trading, it's much the same thing. You could have a profitable run, but if you just, have a trigger to go back to that event where you lost a lot of money, or you had a difficult dialogue with a broker, or, something sort of triggered you, it'll be that gets on your mind. It'll be that that shifts your mindset and closes up your sort of ability to want to be with something comfortable, because you're just sitting with the discomfort and you get stuck with discomfort. And I think people, the risk is that you get stuck in a world where discomfort is normal. And, so awareness and attention of your state becomes really, really relevant, particularly in trading, because, just because of the cognitive load that trading hits you with. Traders have to be on top of this. And I was laughing to myself when I think Steve will perhaps guess what I'm about to say, when we talked about how do you get outside your comfort zone. And I did an experiment when I was doing some serious training within a big bank that I worked for at the time. And I thought, well, I better start practicing what I preach, because I was, preaching the fact that actually it's good to get out your comfort zone every now and then, just to sort of, experiment and just sense something different. So I had 12 weeks of ballet, and that was really, really sort of uncomfortable to start with. It was almost like I hid on the first day, right? So I had to get all the kit, right? And I get ribbed by Steve for this. But to me, actually, it was really important for all of us to do something that actually has got a degree of pain around it in terms of discomfort, to just experience the whole process of going through it. Because actually, after about two of these sessions, I was really enjoying it. This is great. I'm enjoying this. Because, we have this sort of preconceived view of what something is. And sometimes we create this discomfort in our mind just because of lack of knowledge, lack of intelligence about something. And until we actually do something, we actually think, well, what the hell was I uncomfortable about? You start to sort of get into the process and think, yeah, I can understand this. I needed to learn some French and stuff like that, but that is probably more of a discomfort to me than the ballet itself. But I think we have to do these things in life. You can't just be, running this normal sort of journey without pushing yourself.
I'll just jump in there a second, okay? Because when you were talking about the ballet, what's really weird about that, and I'm thinking of all the different, there was 43 weird and wonderful things you did in there. Some of them were not, for all of us, then they're going to be quite easy for some of us. Got to run a marathon. I've run the London Marathon a couple of times. I love running. It's not out of my comfort zone. But ask me to do ballet and put a tutu on or whatever you had to do. Did you wear a tutu, by the way, Mark?
No bloody tutu. What do you...
That's what you got to do.
Oh, I had black tights on. Give you a clue.
Okay.
I needed something to keep my legs intact.
It's not your legs I was thinking about, but seriously, though, I mean that's a great example, isn't it? That a lot of those things, climb a mountain, love to do that. Don't know about sleeping in a bivouac on the beach. I'm not sure about that in a lightning storm, but doing the running. But they're different things make us uncomfortable and they make other people comfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting what you said. There's a lot of things came out of that last bit. I love the ballet example. That's perfect. That's a brilliant way of counterintuitively doing something that you find uncomfortable, and this is really what it's all about. This is something. This whole openness to trying new things is something that has had such a profound impact on my life, and I think that it's a universal truth, I guess, that doing things that are uncomfortable can help us to build resilience. And I think everyone is going to be challenged by different things. So I talk a lot about creating challenges that are relevant to you. So find things that would terrify you and then deliberately go and do them. So there's this concept I quite like to talk about, and it's something that I wrote about in my first book. It's something I write about in my new book as well. It's called the anti-bucket list. And this is a great way of creating challenges that are very relevant to you. So we all know what the bucket list is. It's a list of things you want to do before you die. You want to go to Vegas. You want to see the Northern Lights. There's loads of different things, right? The anti-bucket list is the opposite. So you look at things that you really don't want to do and you would want to avoid at all costs because they're terrifying, they're scary, they're uncomfortable. So when I first started this, so many things were on that list. Most things were on that list when I was in my very anxious space. So basically, my list at first was very large because almost everything terrified me. But then slowly over time, my confidence came back and I started to attack these things and do them, and my confidence came back. But then the key with the anti-bucket list is to really seek out those things that push you. So I had a really big fear of needles. So for instance, for that, I went and had acupuncture, which is like the complete, if you have a fear of needles, the last thing you want to do is go and have acupuncture where they put needles in your face and you like all over your body. So this is really like leaning into that fear, and doing that, you experience so much growth from it. And I learned so much about my mind by looking at that and deliberately facing it. And this kind of escalated. And then I went and gave blood, which, oh my God, that was a really big deal for me. I know for so many other people, they have no problem with needles, but for me, that was so difficult. But that's the point. So the idea of this is to think about what scares you, what you dislike, how can you turn that into a challenge? And then when you're doing that, you can look at what's going to help you to manage the fear you would feel before that. And then that lesson, that particular thing can then translate into the rest of your life.
We'll return to the podcast shortly. The AlphaMind Podcast is sponsored by TradeStation Global and the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA. TradeStation Global is a multi-asset trading platform with access to international markets where you can trade a range of instruments from one account and leverage professional-grade tools like Radar Screen, The Matrix, and Easy Language. And with TradeStation Global, there are no hidden price spreads, just transparent, low commissions. To find out more and to open an account, visit tradestation-international.com/AlphaMind or go to our website alpha-mind.net or see the link in the episode description. The Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, provide world-beating technical analysis education programs and offer outstanding membership services. AlphaMind Podcast listeners can obtain a 10% discount on the cost of their excellent home study course and home study course with a diploma package. To find out more about this offer, go to our website alpha-mind.net or see the link in the episode description. Now back to the podcast. I'm going back to some of the things in the book there. And I think this is one of the things that, again, people feel in markets. And you had it, which was the mental hurdle of feeling like an idiot. I think you talked about reading a demanding technical book.
So the book that I use as an example was Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, which reads like a very technical maths problem where it's a philosophy book. So I think it's interesting because, when we think of comfort zones, a lot of people think, oh, just go and run a race or do something physical. But it's so much more than that. We have academic comfort zones. We have mental comfort zones, skill-based comfort zones. There's so many different things. So I think it's important to be able to explore stepping outside of all of these different comfort zones. So I think that's a great way of doing it, learning like a new skill that's quite technical, pushing yourself to understand something that's unfamiliar, because it's easy to not do that. It's easy to want to avoid the new and the uncomfortable. So I think we can play around with it, and I think we can look at this. There's such a broad range of ways we can all step outside of our comfort zones. So yes, it's interesting that the book one is good. Choose something that, like a topic you'd never read about, and then go and read about it, but like in a technical way, and read something that's new. And you never know what that's going to do, what kind of connections you'll make with that, and how you can bring that into the work that you do.
And reflect on it as well, because I mean that was the thing I got. It was, and I have this almost whenever I read an Nassim Taleb book, which is one of my favourite sets of books to read. But that guy is so smart, and I end up thinking sometimes, although he can be a bit arrogant as well, we do know that. But I sometimes find myself thinking, but I find myself thinking, I really don't know anything at all. I hope I don't end up talking with someone about this one day, because they're going to think I'm an idiot. And that is one of the biggest blockers I come along often with people. They fear they're going to look stupid.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to challenge, actually. It's this fear of being judged by others.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of work that we can do with that. The Stoics talk about this a lot, and it's very interesting how we think other people view us. Yeah. And I love that the Stoics would deliberately wear embarrassing things to basically feel shame and then practice overcoming that shame. So there was a Roman Stoic called Cato who would turn up to an important meeting wearing something ridiculous. All his peers would laugh at him, and he would use that as a way to work on his mindset, which is wonderful. It's a really creative way of dealing with that. And I think this whole concept is fascinating. In fact, it's inspired modern therapy. There's a great type of modern therapy called REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. And the guy who created this, Albert Ellis, loved the Stoics, and he was inspired by this idea of deliberately embarrassing yourself. So he created an exercise where you take a banana for a walk in a busy public space. You basically tie a string to it, and you create your own little pet banana. And you walk around, and everyone's going to look at you and point at you and probably laugh at you. But the point of that is you're doing this to make yourself feel uncomfortable and learn how to get over yourself in a way. And this is an exercise that was used for people with extreme social anxiety. And it's a great way to challenge that internal dialogue, that negative assumption that everyone's looking at us. Most people probably wouldn't notice. When I've done this in central London, it's always quite interesting. Less people point at you than you would think, but they do. Some people point, but it's all about what's going on in your head, and I think it's quite a fun way of challenging that. So I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I think that particular exercise, trying to overcome shame by deliberately embarrassing yourself is great, because that can help us to feel more confident and can help us to face situations where we might feel that we're not particularly confident. So I think we can get a lot out of that.
And I don't think people, as they're listening to you here, maybe they don't realize quite how much that shame factor actually affects them in their work as traders. The fear of shame, even if no one is going to see it or notice it, it's playing out in your head the whole time, and it's stopping you doing things you want to do. One of the things we see in the markets quite often, and I'm sure people listening will relate to that, is not buying or selling when they think they should buy or sell, because it's actually the high of the day or the high of the week, or the low of the day or the low of the week if they're selling. And they feel that if it turns out that they're buying at the very high, which it is at that point, they're going to look so stupid, even though no one else is going to see them. It's just the narrative in their head. And then, of course, they'll look back on it and it's much higher a few days later. And they're thinking, why didn't I buy there? Because it's no longer the high. But that feeling is there. It's real. So, to be able to move on past that and get past that, and a lot of the best traders, they're able to do that. They don't even hesitate. They don't think twice about it.
I think that's what's interesting with that is, if we can look for the lesson, if we can learn how to reflect on everything that happens, then it gives everything value, even the bad things, even the bad experiences. So something that we can view as a disaster can actually have value. It can teach us a lot. This goes back to what you were saying earlier about how if you've been through something, if you've had a bit of a challenging time, that can actually be something that defines you. It can be something like a catalyst for progress and change and positivity. So for me, that whole spell of extreme anxiety was a stepping stone in a very positive way, and actually something that I'm so grateful to have been through, which is crazy looking back. In hindsight, I can say that at the time, definitely it wasn't something that I was particularly grateful for. It was a very intense experience. So I think, yes, certainly with your audience as well, when they're experiencing a setback or something that might initially look like a fail, in a way, if you're looking for a lesson, then that will give that failure validation. It will give it value. If you're taking a lesson from it, obviously, if you let that happen and then you just kind of ignore it, then it doesn't have the same value. If you learn from everything that happens, then that's something that can completely change the way that you perceive an event. So I think that's a great idea. That's something that comes, that's a very Stoic way of handling a setback or something that doesn't go to plan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people again in this business that that they adopt Stoicism. It's almost the way you cope with this, the way you prepare for it, is to take a Stoic outlook. It can, of course, make you quite cynical as well, sort of not to trust anything. You sort of start off with a distrusting angle, and I think we see that a lot. But it's not really cynicism. I think it's taking a step back. That's what it is, and not allowing everything that's thrust in your face. Because you face a lot of people trying to give you information, trying to convince you to buy this stock or take their idea or, follow what they're doing. And in a sense, that has dangers in itself. So kind of being stoic about it is taking a step back and being more objective about it. It kind of almost plays against the kind of follow the herd mentality.
Well, I think there's so many lessons we can take from the Stoics, and yet absolutely that objectivity, being able to take a step back, is something that's extremely powerful. So I tend to do quite a lot of workshops on Stoicism, and I work with banks and various businesses in the financial industry, and I find that there's certain themes that they often ask about and that I often talk about. And what you've just said is one of the key things, being able to control your emotions. And the Stoics have a word, it's apatheia, which is the ability to remain in control of our emotions, irrespective of what they are, being able to control them, but not repress them. We're not pushing them down. We're not ignoring them, but we're being able to, as you said, have a step back, distance ourselves a little bit. There was Athenodorus, this Stoic who used to advise the Roman Emperor Octavian on how to manage his anger. And he had some great advice, which was before you do anything stupid, before you order someone to be killed or punch someone, recite the alphabet. And it's this just very simple advice. Just take a minute, just have a breather and work some space into what's happening. Just give yourself time to just cool off. And I think this is timeless wisdom, because we all know the classic example of when someone gets an email that's a little bit triggering and they respond too quickly. They haven't had a chance to process it. They respond quickly and then it spirals out of control. And this is an example I like to talk about a lot, because I think people take it seriously when actually you could lose your job if you send the wrong email with the wrong tone to the wrong person at the wrong time, because you weren't in control of your emotions. You can lose your job. And I think that's something that suddenly people pay attention, because they're like, actually, hang on a minute. Yes, I can see that. And everyone's on edge as well. Depends on which part of the industry you're in, but there's a lot of pressure. So I think being able to have control over your emotions, being able to not get sucked in at a crucial time is so important. So this advice from the Stoics to just give yourself a little bit of space before you respond is incredibly empowering to do that. And it's a very simple thing that we can do, just taking a little bit of time to just not engage it. They encourage us to catch them before they completely ignite. So if you feel this sense of frustration or anger, whatever the emotion is, the Stoic advice is to just immediately try and stop it from getting worse, because it's harder. It's very, very hard to unravel when we're caught up in our emotions. So I think before we get too deep into that, that's what the Stoics advise. Just quickly do something, go and, give yourself a minute, and this is something that can be great. I think there's lots of tools we can do. And I know that in modern therapy, the idea of distracting yourself from a problem, some people are like, oh, that's not a good way of dealing with it. And in the long run, yes, having a distraction might not deal with the underlying issue, but it is something that can help us to not get caught up in our emotions. So the idea of just quickly taking a time out, doing something that's going to distract you for a minute, just so that you don't engage in those emotions, is something that can be really helpful. And that's a very useful bit of Stoic wisdom, I think.
Yeah, there's certainly power in the ability to be able to pause, and it's the difference between disaster or just carrying on with something that's appropriate. As a conversation or even a trading decision. There are times when trading decisions, when we're a bit too hot-headed about things, and we trade for the sake of it, which is a problem, or we get sucked into the momentum of the almost the gamification side of Vegas, gets constantly feeding a machine, and some people trade in that sense of desperation, but there is the need to step away to actually pause, sometimes longer than just the alphabet, but actually recognizing that you're actually in a condition that requires some self-control from a trading perspective is very, very important too. I want to go back on this fear of shame, and certainly an example that I had was, and Steve will know this too, in the emergence of the options market, which so you had the futures market, which is fairly standard, and the options market turned up with all these Greek letters and all these extra bit of complex mathematics of determining price action. I remember in the very early days, people were just very uncomfortable about walking in and understanding about options. I mean, senior people would just not want to talk about it because it involved a fair amount of work to understand the concept, particularly in those early days of the emergence of financial markets. But actually, the number of firms that had massive disasters because the people that were trading options were doing things that wasn't really being noticed by the people in control. They'd just say, yeah, fine, everything's okay. But, I knew at least one firm that lost $100 million purely because the seniors hadn't bothered to take on the discomfort of learning this apparent complex subject and just letting someone run away with the risk. And it cost the business $100 million purely because people didn't want to accept that, we need to go through this discomfort of learning because it's necessary. And I think, discomfort turns up in many ways. The early days of me on a trading floor, we talk about going out in public wearing a multicolored jacket as a futures trader in week one of the futures market opening up in London. And then your job was to go into this 300-year-old building with this massive space and shout out these numbers at the top of your voice. I mean, I start to think about it as whether that was my therapy, whether that was me, me managing me through having been thrown into that role. Because as you say, some of these things turn up not through our desire. I just got shoved into this early days of the futures market, and we just had to grow and live with it. But the thought of it, walking around in a striped jacket in the city of London and shouting out at the top of your voice in an ancient building for all day, and getting excited about it when things get busy, you think, oh my God, on the face of it, that's very uncomfortable. But actually, I probably, did myself an awful lot of good, having, accepting that process, going through that process, learning from that process. And actually, it then became the norm. So I think discomfort becomes the norm relatively quickly, but you got to start off with throwing yourself at it.
Oh, 100%. You got to go for it. And that's where the lessons are. I think
absolutely.
it's, you got to take it, take life by the reins. You got to be proactive. I think what you were saying there was quite interesting about being a beginner. When people are having to learn something new, I think people can feel uncomfortable with being a beginner, especially adults. Adults are, in a way, we can be useless at being beginners because we're so self-conscious of not being good at something, and that can really put us off. If we don't get something straight away, it's easy to not want to understand it, to just be like, oh, okay, let's move on. But actually, again, this is a different type of comfort zone. How do we manage being a beginner? How do we learn? How do we stay open? So I think openness is really key here.
Great. I tell you what, Ben, it's really interesting that you said that, and Mark, you brought that up, because I made some notes from the book, certain things I wanted to bring up, and that's exactly one of them that I got from the book. Because the great thing about it is it makes you reflect. Hearing your stories makes you reflect on your own experiences. And there was a bit where I realised I don't mind new challenges, but I don't like not being good at something. And that's my ego. That's where my ego comes in. And I think what Mark was talking about there is when ego gets in the way of senior people not understanding something that's going on in their business. And they're trying to avoid that. They're trying to avoid revealing that they don't know something that's really complex. And often they'll bypass it and then blame others. And I've noticed that, often myself, that learning journey, let's say the learning journey of something is going from 1 to 10, where 10 is you're very good at it. But I don't like that bit going through 2, 3, and 4, where I'm not very good at it. And that can take a long time. So I'll notice that I might give up, avoid, even hide at moments that were really important for me not to. I need to persist in it and accept for a time, I'm not very good at it. I'm not a novice. And I see lots of people in trading make that same mistake. They want to believe after 6 months that they're good at it when they're not going to be good at it in many respects for at least 5 years. And I can't remember where I got that from the book. I don't know if it was the canyoning bit but there was a bit of it that really stood out for me.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think the idea of being a beginner and being able to be open to things is profound. I think I've learned so much from that. I quite enjoy being a beginner now, and I think it brings color and nuance and richness into your life. And this is something that you can then apply to so many other things. It's hard to be an expert in absolutely everything, but I think there's a huge amount of value from that initial experience and exposure of new things. And this can then translate into stuff that we already know. It can match up with knowledge that we have in a specific field, but taking ideas and crossing them over can lead to some interesting breakthroughs. And it's that I think is so wonderful about being open. And that's something that I always that's one of the key takeaways for me from this whole project and everything I've been doing, all of these challenges, the bizarre, the bold, whatever. I find that it's just exposure to new things, and that is a really great way of having excitement and variety in life and novelty, and there's always lessons, because there'll be lessons in many different ways, but that you weren't expecting. So I think that's something that everyone can experience and everyone can do. Everyone can push themselves to try new things and be open. And as long as I said previously, as long as you're open to looking for a lesson, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're not very good at it. There's still something to learn from it.
And the book, I've got to ask you in the book, have there been any challenges that you just wouldn't go to, or that you just thought, I'm not going to do that?
Oh, well, so in the book, all of the challenges that are in the book are the ones that I did. So everything is.
Are they all the ones you set yourself? Are they all the ones you set yourself, or were there some? I'm not being the ones that obviously are, unethical, for example. But are there any that you set yourself and I just can't do that?
Well, the giving blood was something that I've only recently done, and that's taken so long for me to muster up the courage to do that.
Right.
Now, for a lot of people, that sounds like nothing, and I guess it's something that I've had to work at for quite some time, and that was it's surprising, because it doesn't sound that bad, but for some people, it's really difficult. So that I've put off for so long, and I knew the thing is, when you put things off and when you're really close to it, you almost you kind of know that actually I need to do that, because that's where a lot of growth is, if I can force myself to do that. So I'm really proud that I managed to do that, and I learned a lot from it, and the confidence that I got off the back of it. It's a small win. For other people, it might not seem like a big deal, but when it's all about how you are handling that situation. So for me, that was a really big thing to do. And I think, out of all the challenges, that was one that certainly sticks out in my memory.
But are there any now that you're thinking, I can't? I mean, for a lot of people, standing on a stage and talking to an audience scares the pants off a lot of people, even senior people.
Yeah. Public speaking is something that a lot of people have a huge problem with. I really enjoy that now. It's something, my journey with that's been quite interesting, because again, back in this state of extreme anxiety, I remember one of the first things I did, I went to watch this Polar Explorer talk in central London in like the National Geographic store. And one of my challenges was, okay, just ask a question at the end. It was the Q&A. And all I had to do was say to him, I had my question. I was quite nervous about asking this question. And all I had to say was, what was your first expedition? I sort of geared this up and made it into this huge thing. And I just could, it was so embarrassing to actually think about it now. I was like, when I put my hand up and then I said the question, I couldn't even say the word expedition. I was like, what's your first? And he hasn't finished a word for me. But then, so that was back then, and now I'm speaking to 700 people. One of the last speaking conferences I did to 700 people. I did one last week at the Literary Festival. I love getting up on stage and speaking, and now it's ironically it's something that I get paid to do. So I think it's amazing how the more we expose ourselves to this, the more we do things that initially are uncomfortable, we can learn to relax in that environment, and actually we can gain so much from it. And I love speaking now, because I feel that it's something that it teaches me every time I do it, and I really enjoy this quite exciting, and there's so much that can be gained from it, and I really enjoy that. So it's an interesting journey, but yeah, it's always, I don't know, I think it's trying to find things that push us and explore them.
Brilliant. And you said you've got a new book coming out. Is that correct?
Yes, the book's actually just come out.
Right.
It's called How to Control the Uncontrollable.
Oh, wow.
10 game-changing ideas to help you think like a Stoic and build a resilient life. And this book is all about Stoicism. So my first book was very much about my journey of anxiety and how challenges helped me to manage that. But this book is very much about Stoic philosophy, and it explores that in detail. It talks about some of the principles that we can use to manage chaos. And as I talked a little bit about managing strong emotions. So that's one of many of the principles that I explore in detail in the book. So it's been a pleasure to create this book, and I've loved getting into the philosophy in depth. So it's exciting that that's out, and yeah, I've been out and about talking about Stoicism to many different people. So it's exciting times.
Brilliant. Well, listen, I'm going to put that on the show notes, both the name of that book, and you've had a couple of other ones, including How to Be Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable. Mark, I'll hand over to you whether there's anything else you want to add.
No, I'll start to wind up. Fascinating, Ben, to talk to you. It's clear from us looking at Ben, and obviously you can't see Ben as we can see Ben, but we have this very cool, calm, positive fellow with a degree of aura about him in front of us. So clearly the stuff he's doing is working very well on how it's coming through as him managing himself. And I think that it's quite clear that there is opportunity in discomfort, and if you think you're in the comfort zone, you want to stay there, fine. But there may be this world of opportunity out there just because you can't be bothered to go and face discomfort. But of course, some of us that get thrown discomfort, from left field. And so having a toolkit, having a method of dealing with discomfort becomes fundamental, really. It's something you need to work upon. And if that means creating your own anti-bucket list, and of course, that's a fabulous phrase, I think, that would last that would last ages. And an anti-bucket list is just brilliant. Just make a list of everything you don't want to do, but go and do them. I just can't think of a better way forward and a better message to leave everybody with. And I think in the markets it's walk towards the complex. Don't walk away from the complex. Walk towards stuff that needs you to learn, that needs you to go beyond just your normal habitual behavior. Because when you do that, you might find some wonderful opportunity, and it will just beef you up for being more resilient for the next challenge that you face. So go read the book. Fascinating stuff. I'll leave you with Marcus Aurelius saying the only control is the response to our external events. That's the only control that we have, how we respond to things.
No, we can't let Ben go yet without saying the name of the Welsh railway station.
Oh, of course. He's right.
Oh yeah. So one of the challenges in the first book is looking for challenges in small places. It's not always about the marathon and the ice swim or the mountain. There's ways we can push ourselves in small ways, in small places, the little things. So I've had fun exploring them, and one of them is to learn how to say which is the longest train station name in the world. It's in North Wales. I'm sure there'll be some people, if you're from Wales and you've heard me say that, you've got your head in your hands right now. But it took a while.
I've got another question for you. Can you just recite that pack of cards you remembered?
The original one. No.
Listen, Ben, this has been great. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and it's been great to chat to you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening today. We would like to thank our podcast sponsorship partners, TradeStation Global and the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA. You can find out more about our sponsors at our website, alpha-mind.net, or see the link in the episode description. TradeStation Global is a multi-asset trading platform with access to international markets where you can trade a range of instruments from one single account and leverage professional-grade trading tools. Visit tradestation-international.com/AlphaMind to know more. The Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, provide well-beaten technical analysis education programs. AlphaMind Podcast listeners can obtain a 10% discount off the cost of their excellent home study course. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, we'd appreciate it if you could leave a friendly review or provide a rating for the show on whichever podcast service you use. You can find out more about us at our website, alpha-mind.net. You can follow us on Twitter at AlphaMind101 and at AlphaMind102. And you can connect with me, Stephen Goldstein, and my co-host, Mark Randall, on LinkedIn. You can also follow us and can check back over some of our past episodes on the AlphaMind Podcast.com. We wish you the best of luck in the markets. Have a good week.